Have you ever wondered why the man who once seemed indifferent becomes consumed the moment she walks away? In the silent wake of her absence, a woman becomes myth, not merely memory, but symbol. She ceases to be flesh and blood, and instead becomes everything he cannot name within himself. Her silence reverberates through the chambers of his psyche, echoing where certainty once lived. He does not miss her laugh, her touch, or her gaze. Alone he misses the mirror she held to his soul, the one he smashed when his ego could not bear what it saw. Carl Jung spoke of animeth, the feminine within the masculine unconscious. She is not a woman, but the idea of woman. She is feeling, mystery, intuition, the deep waters of the unknown. When a man meets a woman who embodies the anima, she does not simply enter his life, she activates something ancient within him. A hunger, yes, but not for her body, for wholeness, for the missing half of his psychic equation. And yet, he cannot hold her, because to hold her would mean facing the parts of himself he has disowned. This is why the vanishing woman becomes an obsession. When she leaves, she takes with her the dream he barely understood. He scrambles not for her hand, but for the sense of meaning she awoke in him. Her withdrawal is an initiation, a severance that confronts him with his shadow, the archetypal dark twin, the repressed pain, the avoided truth. He cannot pursue her without confronting himself. And most men are not ready for that descent. But she is no fool. She did not vanish out of cruelty. She vanished because her soul refused to beg for breadcrumbs in the desert of his emotional starvation. She saw that his desire was tethered to conquest, not communion. And so, she became what the mystics call a sacred absence, a wound he must study, a silence he must translate. You may know this woman. Perhaps you are her. You gave everything in silent offering, not loud, not desperate, but divine. You nourished. You understood before words arrived. You touched him, beyond the skin. And when he didn't value it, when he mistook depth for weakness, he slipped away like mist at dawn. And suddenly, you became the only thing he could think about, because the unconscious does not let go easily. It doesn't simply move on. It loops, it fixates, it dreams, it projects. He starts to see her in other women, starts to recall her voice in moments of stillness. He imagines reaching out, but stops short because the deeper part of him knows to reach her again would mean transforming, and the ego resists death. The false self clings to its throne. This is not about love. Not yet. It is about awakening. The man cannot explain why she haunts him. He dates others, distracts himself, rationalizes, but he cannot shake the image of her walking away. Her silhouette burned into memory, her energy lingering in places she's never been. It is archetypal, the way Eurydice slips back into the underworld just as Orpheus turns, the way Psyche must complete her tasks before reuniting with Eros. The myth lives through him now, and here lies the tragedy. Some men never understand. They confuse obsession with possession. They chase shadows instead of doing the work. They want the woman to return, but not the version of themselves they would need to become to hold her sacred. They call her crazy, too much, or hard to love. Anything to avoid the truth. She touched a depth in him he has yet to reach on his own. But not all men stay lost. There are those who feel the ache not as punishment, but as prophecy, who take the pain of her absence and let it tear open the veil between persona and soul. They sit with their shame. They wrestle the demons. They stop running from the little boy who never learned how to love without control. They begin the slow, brutal, beautiful path of individuation, the integration of the whole self. And in this journey, they may come to understand she was never theirs to possess. She was a guide, a catalyst, a storm that cleansed, a fire that seared truth into their bones. And even if they never see her again, she altered their axis. She became the feminine divine, not in her presence, but in her absence. So if you, too, have walked away, if you have vanished, not out of spite, but out of self-honoring, know this: your absence is doing the work that your presence never could. You have become his mirror, his muse, his myth. And though he may never thank you, though he may never say your name again, his soul knows. His dreams know. He feels her most when the world is quiet, when the clamor of conquest dies down and there's nothing but the faint echo of what could have been. That's when her image resides not as the woman he once knew, but as the figure his psyche has wrapped in longing, in regret, in myth. She becomes the ghost in his machine, not to torment, but to teach. Jung understood this haunting. He wrote that every man carries within him the eternal image of woman, not of any particular woman, but an unconscious feminine ideal shaped by thousands of years of ancestral memory. When a man encounters a woman who resonates with that image, it's as if a forgotten song begins to play in his blood. He recognizes her soul before he recognizes her face. And when she leaves, it's not merely the loss of a relationship, it's the severing of a psychic cord that once hummed with the promise of wholeness. He obsesses, not because she played a game, but because she didn't. She showed up in truth. And he wasn't ready. She demanded depth, and he offered performance. She wanted to be seen, and he looked at her with eyes still glazed by unresolved pain. Her leaving wasn't a punishment, it was a reflection, a mirror held steady until he could no longer look away from what he had become. And now she lives in the cracks of his certainty. She lives in the moments where his bravado falters, where his distractions wear thin. She is not trying to return, she is trying to awaken. Her withdrawal speaks in symbols. The mind calls it obsession. The soul calls it initiation. Some women do not rage when dismissed. They do not plead. They do not collapse into fragments just because they were not cherished. Instead, they become sacred space. They become wind. They become absence, so palpable it rearranges the architecture of a man's ego. She who walks away in dignity is not weak. She is archetype. She is every goddess who ever slipped through a mortal's fingers, not to tease, but to transform. And still, men try to make sense of her absence in worldly terms. They think if they had texted more, listened harder, stayed faithful, she might still be there. But no, this is deeper. This is soul stuff. This is what happens when the anima is awakened but not honored. She was not asking for perfection, she was asking for presence. She wasn't testing him, she was inviting him. And when the invitation was ignored, it was rescinded by the unconscious itself. A woman like this cannot be pursued in the traditional sense. She does not respond to apologies that seek comfort more than accountability. She does not return for a better version of the same story. To find her again, he must descend into his shadow, into the repressed and the wounded and the unspoken. He must go to the places where his masculinity was shaped by fear instead of integrity. He must confront the boy who learned that vulnerability was weakness, that dominance was love, that emotions were threats. It is not about getting her back. It is about becoming the man who never would have lost her. And yet, her power is not in making him suffer, it is in making him see. Her absence is the alchemical fire. In her silence, he hears his own soul's scream. The longer she is gone, the louder it becomes. But only if he listens. Only if he stops trying to silence the pain and starts trying to understand it. Many men never do. They patch over the wound with another woman, another thrill, another chase. But every new face carries her echo. Every touch feels pale beside the soul connection he once denied. And eventually, if he's honest, he'll admit it wasn't her body he craved. It was the way she made him feel, seen, exposed, held, not in comfort, but in clarity. And that clarity scared him more than any goodbye. You see, the woman who vanishes does not disappear. She integrates into his unconscious. She becomes the reminder he carries into every future love, the watermark on every page of his personal mythology. She is not punishment. She is prophecy. And you, woman, if you've been her, understand the magnitude of your silence. Your withdrawal is not void, it is presence turned inward. It is the refusal to be swallowed by someone else's unhealed parts. It is the revolution of saying, I will not perform for your comfort. I will not beg for your awakening. I will be gone, and you will feel it. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman can do is become a space too wide for a man's shallow waters to fill. And in that vastness, he is left to either drown in what he's lost or learn how to swim into himself. There comes a moment when the man no longer remembers the exact color of her eyes, nor the precise shape of her smile, but he remembers how she made him feel when he stood in her presence. That unrelenting sense that he was being seen not just as who he was, but as who he could become. It wasn't admiration, it was confrontation. And the soul never forgets a confrontation it wasn't ready for. She had that look, the look of a woman who had suffered and survived. A woman who walked through her own personal underworld and returned bearing fire. She had buried illusions, shed personas, and chosen truth over comfort. And he mistook her strength for softness. He mistook her depth for drama, because he had only known women who shrank, and she was born to expand. And now he stares into the mirror, wondering why her memory will not die. Jung reminds us that what we repress returns not as it was, but distorted, exaggerated. The woman who vanishes is no longer just her. She becomes the sum of everything he has yet to become. She is feminine energy in its purest, most confronting form, not submissive, not seductive, but sovereign. And sovereignty terrifies the man who still seeks to dominate instead of unite. She did not make him small, she made him aware of his smallness. She exposed the chasm between his words and his wounds, between his desires and his discipline, between who he said he was and who he kept running from. She was not demanding, she was revealing. And that is the most dangerous gift a woman can offer a man, the mirror of his own unmet potential. So what does he do now? He tries to fill the void with noise. He tells himself she was too much, too emotional, too intense. He clings to every label that helps reduce her to something manageable. Because as long as she stays too much, he doesn't have to admit he was too little in the presence of her truth. But the unconscious doesn't buy excuses at night. She returns, not in body, but in symbols, in dreams he can't explain, in sudden flashes of intuition, in that aching restlessness that no distraction can sedate. She is not calling him back, she is pulling him inward. She is the voice whispering from the depths. You will not escape your own becoming. And slowly, if the man is brave, he begins to unravel. He stops chasing other women and starts chasing the reason why he feels empty without validation. He stops blaming her for leaving, and starts asking why she had to. He begins to recognize that what he called obsession was really his soul mourning the version of himself he refused to step into. This is the work, the real work, the work of the masculine alchemist, to take the loss and transmute it, to stop seeing her as a lost possession and start seeing her as a sacred initiator. A woman like this comes once, maybe twice, in a man's life, and she comes not to stay but to break the cycle. The feminine mystic is not meant to be tamed. She is meant to be honored, to be met soul to soul with reverence, not ownership. When she withdraws, it is not to hurt, it is to heal. She disappears not into the shadows, but into the light beyond his reach. And he, if he chooses growth over grief, must rise to meet her there. To you, the woman who vanished her absence is not silence. It is a symphony that only the awakened can hear. You did not leave because you lacked love. You left because you refused to betray yourself for it. That is the fiercest form of love there is. The love that says, I will not abandon myself to keep you comfortable. And to the man who now walks with her ghost, know this: you are not cursed. You are being called into a deeper manhood, one that does not chase, does not conquer, does not consume, but rather one that meets, holds, expands. Her vanishing was not the end. It was the beginning of your own initiation into wholeness. What she awakened in him cannot be undone. It burns beneath his surface like a buried ember, flaring whenever he dares to be still. He tries to forget, but forgetting her would mean forgetting the first moment he truly glimpsed his own soul, and that is impossible. She had offered him something that could not be replicated. Not sex, not submission, not admiration, but soul. Recognition, that rare, unnerving experience when two psyches collide beyond ego, beyond flesh, beyond time. She was not merely his lover, she was his reflection, his teacher, his test, and he failed. Not because he was unworthy, but because he was unready. The immature masculine seeks control. The initiated masculine seeks truth. In her, he found no chaos, only depth. But depth threatens the man who is still drowning in his own avoidance. He mistook her honesty for attack, her boundaries for abandonment, her tears for weakness, because he had not yet made peace with his own vulnerability. Her emotional richness felt like a storm he couldn't navigate, and so he shut down. He dismissed, he distanced, and now she is gone. Jung would call this the activation of the anima projection, the unconscious projection of a man's internal feminine onto a woman. When she appears, she is divine. She is muse, goddess, healer. But the moment she steps beyond the role he unconsciously assigned, he feels betrayed. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she shattered the fantasy. She became real, and real women demand real presence. So when she vanished, the projection collapsed, and with it, his illusion of himself. He doesn't want her back, not really. He wants the feeling back, the feeling of being seen, held, disarmed. But until he learns to generate that feeling from within, he will always remain chained to the ghost of what he lost. Some men stay stuck here. They build altars to the past, confusing regret with longing. But others, rare, courageous others, begin the descent. They revisit every moment where they turned away from themselves, every unspoken pain, every inherited belief that taught them love must be earned, controlled, or feared. They see how they treated women not as equals, but as reflections of their own insecurity. And slowly, they stop chasing the anima in the outer world and begin to integrate her within. This is individuation. It is the process Jung called the most essential journey of the human souls, the union of opposites, the marriage of the conscious and unconscious, the harmony of the masculine and the feminine. And it cannot happen until the ego is cracked open, until the man faces the parts of himself he once outsourced. To the women he tried to possess, her vanishing was that crack, because he could not love her from the surface. She forced him into the depths, and if he has the strength to surrender, he will discover that the woman he obsesses over was never meant to be his possession. She was his passage into the man he's always feared becoming, strong, soft, present, whole, a man no longer defined by conquest, but by consciousness, no longer threatened by emotion, but guided by it, no longer seeking salvation in another, but offering sanctuary in himself. And perhaps, one day, he will meet her again, not to reclaim what was lost, but to thank her, to bow his head in reverence and say, "You broke me in the exact way I needed to be broken, not for your return, but for my rebirth." And to the woman, yes, you who vanished, you did not disappear. You ascended. You outgrew the cage he mistook for connection. You no longer wanted to be needed, you wanted to be met. And when that meeting never came, you chose yourself. That is your power. Your vanishing is not a retreat, it is a rise. You are not cruel. You are clear. You do not withhold. You witness. You do not punish. You provoke transformation. You are the dream that cannot be owned, the myth that stirs his soul, the mirror that cracked and revealed his truth. The woman who vanishes becomes a force beyond time. She is no longer tethered to the mundane rituals of waiting, hoping, explaining. She has stepped into the mythic, into the eternal feminine that Jung described as the wellspring of life itself, mysterious, powerful, unknowable. She is not playing hard to get. She is being hard to reach, because her frequency now demands a different kind of resonance, and in her absence, the man is stripped bare. Gone are the distractions, the justifications, the illusions of control. What remains is the raw ache of unintegrated longing, not just for her, but for the forgotten parts of himself that she stirred awake. His hunger is not truly for her return, it is for the part of his soul that only revealed itself in her presence. That brief, terrifying clarity where he felt seen beyond the armor. That fleeting moment when he was no longer performing, no longer pleasing, no longer hiding, and now she's gone. Not because he was evil, not because he was cruel, but because he was asleep, and her love could not bloom in the soil of someone who refused to awaken. She had wanted more than comfort. She wanted depth. She wanted resonance. She wanted a man who could look into her chaos and not flinch, who could hold space for her truth without shrinking into defensiveness. A man who wouldn't just listen to her words, but read the silences between them. A man who could meet her at the altar of soul and offer his presence as prayer. But she met ego, she met fear. She met the boy behind the man, still aching for a mother he never felt safe with, still terrified of a woman who would not bend to his pain. And when she realized he couldn't yet see her, she chose to disappear, not to hurt him, but to honor herself. Now he walks through the ruins of what was, trying to fill the void with noise, with sex, with success, with silence. But nothing fits, because the woman who vanishes leaves behind a vacancy that echoes with the sound of truth. The truth of who he could have been if only he had chosen courage over comfort. This is what most men fail to understand. When a woman of soul walks away, She does not slam the door, she leaves it open. Not because she's waiting, but because she trusts life. She knows that true transformation cannot be forced. It must rise from within. And if he ever returns, it will not be because he misses hurt, will be because he met himself. And yet, she does not wait. She continues. She grows. She sheds old versions of herself, like snakeskin. She does the shadow work he refused to face. She stops explaining her worth to people committed to misunderstanding her. She stops shrinking. She stops hoping he'll see the light and begins becoming it. There is a sacred rage in this kind of woman, not the rage of bitterness, but the rage of birth, the wild, holy fire of someone who will never again betray her soul for the illusion of belonging. Her love was never the problem, it was her standards. She was always willing to go deep, but she would not go alone, and so she vanished, not into hiding, but into herself. And that is why he obsesses, because no other woman can quite match the imprint she left. They may be beautiful, they may be kind, they may even adore him in the way his ego craves, but they do not see him, not in the way she did, not with the eyes of the soul. He may try to recreate her, try to mold another into her image, but it fails every time, because you cannot replicate what is divine. You can only rise to meet Aitor, be humbled by its departure. This is not a game. This is initiation. A man who loses a woman like this has been given a rare opportunity to die to his false self, to bury the persona, to rise from the ashes of ego and become someone who doesn't just want love, but embodies it. To become the kind of man who no longer obsesses over what he lost, but who honors the woman who showed him what he could find within. And the woman, she keeps walking, not because she is heartless, but because her heart is sacred. And she has learned that love without depth is a slow form of death. She would rather walk alone in truth than lie in someone else's arms. She does not look back, because she has become what he could not yet see. Whole, radiant, and utterly free. She is gone, but not forgotten. In fact, she becomes unforgettable. Not because of what she did, but because of who she was. Because of how she saw. In a world where most people only glimpse each other through layers of projection and performance, she looked straight into his soul and dared to speak to it. That kind of gaze is not easily escaped. What he felt in her presence was not infatuation. It was reflection. And reflection can be painful when one is not ready to face it. She embodied the sacred feminine Kali, Lilith, Isis, the archetype of the woman who does not bend, who does not beg, who does not settle. She was the wild, the unwound, the storm. That comes to clear, not to destroy. The one who says, if you want to hold me, first hold yourself. She is not for the faint of heart. She is for the man who has walked through fire, who has faced himself, who has crawled back from the edge of annihilation and chosen truth over safety. He obsesses because on some level he knows. He lost a woman who knew how to love him in a way he had not yet learned to love himself. And that haunts him, because he remembers the way her presence demanded his realness, the way she didn't fall for his masks, his polished charm, his curated confidence. She felt his fear before he named it. She knew the places he hadn't yet explored. And when she left, she didn't just leave a space, she left a standard, no shallow conversation satisfies him now. No half-present kiss, no hollow devotion. Because once you have touched depth, superficiality becomes unbearable. He thought she was the one who needed him. Now he realizes he was the one who needed her not to complete him, but to show him what completion even meant. This is the woman who doesn't return just because he misses her. She does not respond to longing, to late-night apologies, to desperation dressed as romance. She waits for nothing. She watches for truth. She listens not to words, but to energy. She is attuned to frequency, not fantasy. To the resonance of inner work, not outer pursuit. And so, if he ever meets her again, it will be by invitation from life itself. A crossing orchestrated by the sacred, not by strategy. She will not be waiting at the same doorstep he left her at. She has moved, evolved. She no longer looks for love in another's eyes, she finds it in her own. This is what so many men misunderstand. She did not leave to be chased. She left because she was done chasing herself inside someone else's unhealed wounds. She realized that love without consciousness is just repetition. She had danced that dance in past lives, past versions, past relationships. And this time, she chose to break the cycle. And Hyphy has done his work. He will not chase her anymore. He will chase himself, his truth, his integrity. He will become the man she once saw buried beneath his armor. Not for her, but for the wholeness that was always waiting inside him. This is where the path diverges, where boys stay stuck in longing, and men rise into becoming, where fantasy gives way to fulfillment, where regret becomes revelation, and the woman, she no longer exists as a memory, but as a movement. She moves differently now, speaks differently, loves differently, because she learned that her love is not a currency to be traded for scraps of presence. It is a sovereign force, and she gives it now only to those who can hold it with reverence. If you are her, hear this. You are not cold for walking away. You are not heartless for choosing yourself. You are not wrong for demanding depth. You are a mirror of truth in a world terrified of reflection, a fire that burns illusions, a flood that cleanses foundations built on fear. You are not too much. You are exactly enough for the man who is ready to meet the divine within himself. And if he's not, then let him obsess. Let your absence do what your presence could not. Let him feel the storm he tried to silence. Let him rebuild in the ruins of your departure, because that is where the true man is born, not in the moment of conquest, but in the quiet devastation of loss, in the sacred echo of the woman who vanished and became legend. There comes a moment quiet, tender, holy when the obsession ends, not because the longing fades, but because the lesson is finally learned. The woman who vanished no longer lingers as torment or temptation. She becomes what she always was, a catalyst, a turning point, the threshold between who he was and who he was meant to become. She did not break him. She broke the illusion that he could love without presence, that he could touch the divine without reverence, that he could receive her without first becoming someone worthy of his own soul. Now he sees, not just her but himself, and in that clarity something shifts. The ache that once consumed him becomes a guide. The echo of her silence becomes a compass pointing inward. For the first time, he no longer sees her departure as rejection, but as redirection. She was not the ending. She was the invitation, and he begins to walk it. The path of the integrated man, no longer chasing the feminine in others, but reclaiming it within. No longer fearing emotion, but mastering it. No longer seeking women who will mother his wounds, but standing as a father to his own soul. This is where obsession alchemizes into awakening, where the haunted becomes the healer, where love is no longer a transaction, but a transmission. The woman who vanished left him nothing but himself, and in the echo of that gift, he became something. real, she too has transformed, not just from the pain, but through it. She no longer feels the need to be understood. She no longer shrinks herself to be palatable. She no longer waits for a man to choose her. She chooses herself again and again with devotion, and that devotion radiates. It softens her face, but sharpens her boundaries. It makes her eyes deeper, her presence more grounded, her energy unmistakable. She does not chase, she does not explain. She attracts not through performance, but through embodiment, because now she is the woman who knows she knows that the right man will not need to be convinced, coerced, or changed. He will arrive already in process, already listening to the voice within that says, there is more to this life than survival. There is soul. He will recognize her not by her beauty alone, but by the stillness in her spirit, by the silence she carries like thunder, by the mirror she holds without judgment. And when that meeting comes, if it comes, it will not be a reunion. It will be a reckoning. To sovereigns standing face to face, not needing, not grasping, but choosing, freely, fiercely, fully. That is the only kind of love she accepts now. The kind that does not fear the fire, but walks through it. The kind that does not crumble under truth, but is built upon it. The kind where the past is not forgotten, but transmuted into strength, into wisdom, into presence. So if you are the woman who vanished, hear this. You are not missing. You are rising. Every time you refuse to settle, every time you walk away from almost, every time you choose solitude over self-betrayal, you are not cold, you are clear, you are not cruel, you are conscious. And if you are the man who obsesses, let that obsession not consume you but refine you. Let it pull you deeper past ego, an excuse, into the core of your own becoming. Let her absence teach you what her presence could not. How to hold yourself when no one else will. How to love without possession. How to stand in truth, even if it costs you comfort. Because in the end, it was never about getting her back. It was about meeting the version of yourself who could have kept her, and to that version awake whole. Ready she may return, or she may not. But either way, you will no longer need her to define your worth. You will know you will have walked through the fire, and emerged not as the man who lost a goddess, but as the one reborn. By her leaving, the woman who vanishes is not lost, she is found in herself. And the man who rises from her absence is no longer obsessed. He is free. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.